This presentation is delivered by the Stanford Center for Professional Development.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Stanford Seminar on People, Computers, and Design. Next week we have Joe Fish Kaye from Yahoo, who's going to be talking about his recent work on families using computers and tablets. And this week we have Neem Moraveji. I've known Neema for 6 or 7 years now. Neema was a PhD student in computer science in the Learning Design and Technology program. He defended his dissertation last year. And I got first to really know Neema when he was a student in my graduate class and also a TA for the Intro HCI course. And after that experience, I wrote him a recommendation letter for an internship at Microsoft Research. And I got a phone call about that letter from another Stanford alum, Mary Morris. And she says, your letter says that Neema is one of the most autotelic people that you've ever met. What on earth does that mean? And I just said, well, hire him and you'll find out. And for those who are still wondering, I think the talk will hopefully answer that question. And to tell you a little bit more about Neema, he, before coming to Stanford as a PhD student, helped run interaction design for Microsoft Research in Asia and was doing some very interesting ICTD work over there after getting his master's in human-computer interaction and Carnegie Mellon. And he's done just some extremely creative boundary-crossing research, and you're about to hear from a lot of that today.
I am floored. Thank you, Scott. I appreciate that. So first off, Wendy Ju just had her second child, I believe. And so she's not here today, but I think, it's worth a moment of our time to just recognize that, that's really what we're all here for in the end. This whole science thing, this whole everything. She's had a baby. The human species continues. And yeah, thank you. So I wish them, I know we all wish them the best. So I got this call from Scott, or this email from Scott saying, hey, this is happening, do you want to speak? And I could take this talk in two different directions, right? One could be very, okay, what is the most kind of traditional way that I could give this talk, or I could try to be, a little inspirational and experimental, and I chose that. So I'm going to try to speak pretty candidly about what we're doing and what we've been doing, and I would love to get your feedback along the way or at the end of the talk. So just very quickly, I feel like every HCI talk should include this. And if your research just totally you can't figure out the path, just spend some time and figure out how your research might be deriving or inspired by some of the work that's come before us. So on the left you have As We May Think from Vannevar Bush. And I included not just a picture of Engelbart, but this particular picture of Engelbart because I love it. And it's just just looking at it is inspirational because of his focus. Because of, look how important every word he says, look how important it is, not only to him, but to the receiver of the information, And so I ask myself, is what I'm saying, can I say it like this? Am I saying it like this? Is it important enough to me? Is it important enough to the receiver to receive this information? And I also love, it says 5 to 3 in the back. It's like not the most fancy formula in the back. I don't know what it actually means, but I thought it was cool. And this whole genre of innovation that was occurring at the time was really in the name, loosely, I would generalize it as collective intelligence, which is a really intriguing phrase. But one of the things that we all may be present to is that sometimes there's such a push for collective intelligence that we have to be careful that it doesn't come at the cost of individual intelligence or individual clarity or individual awareness of where the collective is actually going, right? So if we sacrifice that, there may be this tendency to push towards collective intelligence in such a way that we treat the individuals like, insignificant automata or something, right? Just kind of atoms, right? But I think that if we can do both, then there's a really unprecedented opportunity to achieve Engelbart's vision. So that means, yes, collective intelligence is important and it continues to be, but are we taking care of the individual along the way? Are our tools empowering the most clear and intelligent state of mind in the individual as well? And that's a big question. Also, another thing you should include on HCI talk I've noticed is a quote from Einstein. But I like this quote. And there's a lot of quotes from Einstein that are kind of supposed quotes, but you look like you're like, did he really say that? So I did a little bit of research, and this one he actually did say. So you can rest assured that he said this. And certainly we should take care not to make the intellect our God. It has, of course, powerful muscles, but no personality. It cannot lead, it can only serve, and it is not fastidious in its choice of a leader. It's like, wow, what are the implications of that on our own research and our own work, and our own entrepreneurial work, perhaps? So now I bring back this art piece that I showed earlier when you guys were walking in. And, I would love to have a conversation about how each of you relate to this or what you take from it. I'll share with you my interpretation. I mean, it's always hard to give a really explicit interpretation of a piece of art, but it kind of represents this idea I'm talking about, where you have individuals that are kind of abstracted in individual workers and contributors to global society and economy, but as we work together, we sometimes look and see there's a whole other thing that's missing. There's a whole phenomena that's occurring, which is, and I think you may be experiencing this in your own life, your own sanity. Or what is the point? It's going so fast. Where do I go? Status is extremely important. And it becomes more and more important. The haves, the have-nots. There's different ways you can approach this idea, but there's what I'm kind of speaking to is let's not be afraid to go there. Let's not be afraid. Let's take our creativity and our tools and our research and think about the human experience as well, the meaningful human experience in life, and how that can complement collective intelligence, but also be important in its own right. And specifically, I'll talk about what's referred to as better sameness, right? Are we creating collective intelligence tools that continue to kind of push us in a certain direction, or are we rethinking how our tools should be designed to ensure the most highly productive and optimized individual work and the collective work as well? So I bring the discussion to this place that we do a lot of our most creative thinking and insightful thinking, the shower. Where's the collective intelligence in there? A lot of great insights come from this magical place that we often think is as humans we'll often be like, oh, what is it about the shower? Is it the water? Is it the temperature? Is it And it's like, hey, it's not the shower, it's you. So why are you saying that it's only when you're in the shower or in the bathroom or in the forest? Why are you putting those constraints on yourself? When are your moments of insight and clarity and creativity? And why can't you be in control of that, so that it's not like kind of work really hard and then play hard, or work really hard and then have a flash and stuff. But rather our work is sustainably directed towards a very clear and clear intention that we really can get behind.
So Neem,
Yeah.
is that a guns don't kill people, people kill people argument?
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good way to put it. So, so you might think about the shower. What's happening in the shower when you shower? And and often, a way to describe it is like, I'm just relaxed, or I'm not working, or I'm just feeling the water on my skin. And I'm like, wow, I have limbs, Oh, I have this bump on my knee. Oh, I didn't know that. Where did that come from or something, right? It's like this whole other part of life that we often don't engage with. So really, the simplest way that I could phrase it was, it's like you're not stressed in that moment. I mean, sometimes you're in the shower and you're stressed, and you're not having a lot of insights then probably, I don't know. But it's kind of, I said, you know what, it's something about stress, okay? So, you start looking at what people are saying about stress, learning, attention, insight, and there's a lot of work in this area. Richard Davison does affective neuroscience at University of Wisconsin. He's like a real leader in studying mindfulness and attention. And, his great quote, attention is the key to learning, and meditation helps you voluntarily regulate it. And that is one way of regulating it. But it's not the only way, right? You can see one breath at a time is in the title of this piece. When I talk, so the talk is called Augmented Self-Regulation. Okay, so the previous quote was about regulating your attention, right? Regulating where your attention is going so you can ensure optimal learning, optimal productivity, even optimal communication, relationships, just being present, not being stressed and distracted. So the way I phrase my expression of how technology, what the role of technology is here, is this phrase, augmented self-regulation. So it's really empowering the individual, self-regulation, but augmented by our tools and technologies. So in the end, our innate ability to self-regulate, to ensure optimal, all those things I said, productivity, work, all these things, can be augmented by our tools. It can be. No, it's often not. It's often our systems and tools are just, they're kind of like to be used, and we don't acknowledge the effect that they might have on our ability to self-regulate. So what's happening now in cell phones, it's like, wow, you can chat with anybody at any time, and that's great, but what is the role they're having on our ability to self-regulate? I know that's I didn't explain that very clearly, but let me get into it a bit.
So then you are saying that the shower has a role, that it's not just...
Well, showers could be designed to play a role, or I mean intentionally designed. Yeah, and I mean there are characteristics of the shower that lend themselves to an experience that is not stressful, right? It's loud, you can't use your phone, it's solitary, so something like that. So I saw this web page the other day. Imaging study reveals differences in brain function for children with math anxiety. I think it's great research that they're doing. They're basically finding that fear is the neural correlate for what we call math anxiety. But what I was focusing on was this idea of with math anxiety. It's like a thing, like with an arm. It's like a very real thing. Like you have math anxiety, you have this anxiety, and that strikes me as kind of like it's a label, of course, but it also feels very real rather than something that you may be experiencing, right? And so self-regulation is perhaps a way a child or any of us can learn to work with such a thing rather than saying, oh no, I have this thing and it's just there. Another way to look at it is, this is the cover of Scientific American Mind last year. Although we receive formal training in writing and math, learning how to manage stress is left entirely to chance. And I put this in here, chronic mild stress, because often we think of stress as like, oh, I have this big thing due tomorrow and I'm totally stressed out. And that's like a very acute stressor. But I believe that there's this more invisible stress, this chronic mild stress that's just pervading our day, so much that we don't even know it's there. We just think that that's how it is, until we maybe go camping or something, or we have a really intimate, experience with our family or friends, and we're like, wow, like this is different. This is not how I always feel. So, right. So the tools to manage the stress are not. We can't really assume them. So this is the father of modern research on stress, Hans Selye, Canadian, and he's got this great quote. So he differentiated between eustress and distress, like good stress and bad stress. Anyway, it's fascinating, but the quote really tells a great story. Every stress leaves an indelible scar, and the organism pays for its survival after a stressful situation by becoming a little older. So, and I added the word perceived stressful situation, because this maybe force you to look and put your head up. That's an objective stressor, but me speaking here in front of a crowd, I could easily make this a very stressful situation, very easily. And I'm almost there. No, I'm joking. But what the point of the quote, the reason I like it is that it's really describing the mind-body connection in a very simple way. Your body responds to stress by becoming a little older. It's like, okay, I dealt with that, but there was a little cost to my body, right? Oh, I dealt with all those crazy emails, but I had to give up a little bit of my youth, physically. And I mean that literally, and I'll explain why. So anybody know who this is?
The monkey or the human?
Yeah, ruined my joke. I was going to say no. All right, no. But this is Robert Sapolsky on campus, who's been a real, just amazing researcher in stress. And so he's done a whole bunch of work about how stress is bad for your brain and your body, and also how it occurs with social hierarchies and things like that. But basically, you're just going to have to trust me that that's what that's all about, because I'm not going to keep going on and on about that. But there's a lot of research around stress has, if you think that you're performing best if you're working hardest, you may want to just check and see, well, what is my best going to be if I'm not just working consistently maybe, or directing the attention to the most important task. These might be different from working hardest kind of thing. So just kind of have clarity for yourself about how you're working. So I spoke earlier about aging, right? So this is Elizabeth Blackburn at UCSF winning the Nobel in 2009 for her work on telomeres, which are the tips of your chromosomes, which is like if your chromosome is a shoelace, this is the tip of your shoelace. And basically, as you age, this tip shrinks. And you have this enzyme in your body called telomerase, which protects the tip from shrinking too fast. But stress inhibits the release of that enzyme. So what's really happening is that when you're stressed, your body can't maintain itself. It can't self-regulate itself. It sacrifices that ability, and you're literally aging. And it's at a cellular level. This is how disease happens and breakdown happens. And so that's kind of the biological proof of the aging. But also in the industry, you have this pundit, Linda Stone, talking about email apnea or screen apnea. And I mean, she's not doing empirical studies that are published, but there's a lot of people that are kind of saying, yeah, I experienced that on Twitter, and she's got thousands of people are like, yeah, totally. Basically, the idea is that there's sleep apnea, but there's also email apnea, right? Or anytime you're in front of a screen, where is your breathing at? That's what she's kind of talking about. So, in effect, we know a lot about the why and the how of stress. We've become quite expert at that. But what's missing is, and I think this is what our work is about, a sustainable intervention. And that could be an intervention. It could be an intervention in the way that our systems are designed to mitigate those problems. And that's where our attention is today.
Hey, Neema.
Yeah.
Would Would you include psychotherapy or life coaches as examples of sustainable interventions?
Yeah, I would. Yeah. Specifically, obviously, I'm speaking more about technology, but absolutely. I mean, our social connections and relationships fall into that category as well. So if you have this two-dimensional space of your emotions, fear, being scared is going to be up here. Being bored down here. Relaxed might be here. And being really excited will be up here. And so often we bounce around between these quadrants without a lot of attention to neutral, our neutral space, right? So that, if we're in this neutral space, our body is doing all of the things that it needs to do, these self-regulative processes. Healing happens here, right? Reproductive things happen here, and give us the energy to. When there's a need to be excited, we can be excited. When there's a need to be scared, we can be scared, and so on, right? So I call this space calm. You could call it whatever you want. Another way to look at it is restful alertness. So this is not about being relaxed, which is important too, but this is a sustainable state that you can encounter, and you do encounter throughout your day, you know? If you find yourself frequently excited or stimulated, you might call it. That's how I know I often am in that space because I'm responding to a lot of things. Well, just having the word calm and understanding what it might mean for you could be helpful. So here we are at Stanford, right? The place where we create a lot of the technologies that stimulate people and allow them to do a lot of things, do new things. And I think it's really appropriate that we do that, but we're also very interested in quality of life here, right? We're very interested, I mean, there's the whole duck syndrome, right? We're very interested in being in nature, eating good food, having great relationships. So we're a leader in both of these things. And so giving a name to this calming technology lab, a place where people can come to think about these problems and use the best skills of design and the research that they know from whatever discipline they come from, and studying and designing new ways that can create the environment for productivity and communication that we're used to with technology, but also acknowledging human nature, acknowledging what is best for humans, which is going to be an inclusion of that calm state within a day. So, transition. Now I'm going to move to the next part of the talk. I put this in here for me, but then I was like, why not all of us? Take a deep breath, right? So, one thing I notice when I do that is, wow, where was my breathing before that? I have to tell myself to take a deep breath. So that means that before that, it was not deep, right? Where was it? It was shallow. I don't know where yours was. Probably, maybe, I don't know. But you can see that the breath, which is the focus of what I'm going to be talking about today, can play a key role in this. So this was the first academic endeavor I made into this idea a few years ago. And if you know about HCI, there's this term of the calm technology, which is really appropriate for the ubiquitous computing field, which is from Mark Weiser, I believe at Syracuse Park. And the idea is that the technologies will be adapting to human beings as far as when they should be bringing us attention and when they should be fading back out. It's not going to be like, hey, this is happening, but when to fade out, when to stay in. So it's calm technology. And I think that's great. The way I phrased calming technology was that it's explicitly designed to induce states of calm. Like it may be very active in its interaction with you, and that's okay. But the goal is to induce that state of calm. So I did this poster, and then I started teaching a class. This is Decompress, Designing Calm. Yeah, Chime?
So I have a quick question. So if all technology was calm technology, then would you still need calming technology?
I don't know. I don't know. I really don't know. That's a good question. So this is the homepage for the Designing Calm class, which I'll be teaching again this winter. And I wanted to show you, now you might say, well, what does a calming technology look like? I mean, it could look like a billion different things. I don't know. But I wanted to give some examples from student projects that were created in the class. So here is look forward. So this was an idea where the student said, you know, Facebook is often about my past events and things that I did, but what was missing was every time I think about the future, I'm stressed about my deadlines. I want to look forward positively to things, so I wanted to kind of tag people in the future, like I'm looking forward to having lunch with my girlfriend tomorrow, you know, and then it would tag her and so on. So it was just an example. This was a project where after you step out of a lecture, the student would have a service that would send a text message right after a lecture. So instead of feeling like, oh my God, I have to remember all that information, it was like, hey, tell us in 5 words an insight from the class. And so you might do that, and then a couple hours later you'd get a text with 5 other people's insights in the class or summaries of the class. And then you vote on your favorite one, and at the end of the day, you'd see which one was the winner. And the idea there was that as soon as you step out of the class, instead of like having this jumble of information in your head, and anxiety and fear, you would say, I did some work. I consolidated my knowledge about this class. I summarized it for myself and for others. It's gone. And then I see other people's perspectives on it without actually studying. I can see, oh, well, that was their take. Oh, and it's all bringing back the class in a very kind of low bandwidth way, and I vote and see the best one. And there's a little bit of fun and engagement in there as well. So that was the idea. Yeah, Terry.
I'm just curious about that as to why that last step, because when I've got a class and now I've got this stress of how do I get the best
Yeah, so I think he did that because he wanted to motivate people to come up with something that was going to resonate with more people and be compelling to other people. It was more of so this is a great example of thinking about product design and user experience design as well as the calming aspect. So creating something that people are going to be excited to use or something. And I could totally see it going the other way or having that.
I guess the question underneath that is the connection. What's the connection between competition and stress?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's just. So that's a whole separate discussion I won't go into. But often what I get from people, what feedback I get is that at some level, if you're interacting with anything, there's going to be an element of stress, right? You're interacting with something, you're being demanded to respond and so on, and it's going to be up to the designers to really be artful in a sense, and also evaluate the effects of different levers that they're manipulating, right? So turning off the competition, seeing what happens for which people, and so on. So
it points out that depending upon what your goal is, calming may not always be what you want. Like if your goal is to leave lecture calm, that's a subtly but importantly different goal than to leave lecture having learned something from it.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be the case that the competition helps force you to distill what you got out of it. So you learn something even if it induced a bit of stress.
Yeah, and it may be that the competition that you felt before using such a service, oh my God, there's all these other students in the class, which one is the best, and so on, that may be so high that it may be precluding the learning, whereas this competition might be just, there's different ways to approach it. This is an example of a project, we're calling it Malo, but this is an attempt at a calming email client that chunks your email delivery into kind of, depending on your email patterns, but maybe 7 emails or 4 emails at a time, and gives you awareness of how many times you've been checking your email, how much processing that you've been doing, meaning like how productive you've been doing relative to your normal days, how much time you spent, and so it's thinking about email from the perspective of, well, how can we have people every time they check their email feel a sense of accomplishment rather than overload, right? So and I was talking with different members of the research team before class, and there's just so many different ways to approach, well, what could be calming for a person when it comes to email, you know? So I'm just showing some of it, and we can talk about that later. This was one of our students that was working on sleep, and it was like, you know, not necessarily what the quality of sleep was, but rather, you know, did you hit your sleep goals? This was a Stanford-wide game that he created. And if your sleep goals were only 5 hours per night, did you reach them? Because a lot of times it's really about feeling that you're doing okay. And if your sleep goals are 5 hours a night, but you feel good about that, then that's fine. And maybe after time, you may want to increase that, but who are we to judge? We're just interested in the sense of calm, the state of calm. This is one of our students that was working on the moment before going to sleep and the anxiety and stress that she and her participants were feeling. And so she said, well, if I'm going to use the technology before I go to sleep, at least I would prefer it to be reflective of one of my values. It's not a very high quality screenshot, but you'd specify some of your values and then say, what happened today that to me that fulfilled this value for me, and then it would share that with another person, so creating some social connection. So that was her expression. You can see that you probably would never have guessed that this is a calming technology, right? And that's part of the class, is that you go into your life and you go into what you see as where stressors are occurring, and you can create technology for that, right? Yeah.
So this makes me wonder how much phatic communication in general is calming. Because that's in a sense what this is, right? A contentless interaction that's just saying, I'm thinking of you, right? And
I'm thinking of you I'm reflecting on my day, and I'm thinking of you as somebody who would care about that. Because what's happening is, like, I was reminded of this is one of my personal values, and this happened to me today because of that, and I want to share that with a core member of people that you have. That's how she designed it.
so there's a reflective aspect.
Yeah, exactly. Which is what she was really trying to do. She was trying to say, you know, if those moments before sleep, if they could change it from email to like reflection of my day, I mean, that's a real shift, right? This is another team at Stanford that created this for Nokia. They call it Considerate, and the idea is that you start the day with 100, and every time you check your phone, this number goes down. And then if you tilt it, it shows you like your email checking patterns, right? Just to bring awareness to it. And their take is that, like, you know, it's really, if we could increase the awareness of how I'm using my phone, how I'm relating to my technology, then this is a way of, you know, bringing more awareness to my state in general, which would mitigate stress and bring back that neutral state. This is a project where a researcher from Sony was in the lab and in the class, and what he created was, when he's texting somebody, instead of that person just being like just a name on the screen, he would press their face and feel their heartbeat. That person was wearing a heart rate monitor and would feel, and it would vibrate a little bit. The phone would vibrate. And we tried it in the class, and it was just like, whoa, this is completely different. This is totally different. You know, it's a whole other axis of interaction with social interaction with people. This was another student who was working on eating, emotional overeating, and she was targeting women. And she found that she was talking with a lot of other people, and she found that, you know, when these women were feeling stressed, they would eat differently, perhaps overeat. And so what she was creating was a mindful eating thing, where I won't go into all the details, but at some point after the day, it asks you these very simple and fun questions, so you reflect back on how you're eating. And so the next time you're eating, you know this thing is going to be coming up. And so it's like it brings a different level of attention to your meal and what you're eating and stuff. So this was her. And you can totally see, if you fast forward 10, 20 years from now, and you look back at like, oh, what did people start doing then? This was one of the aims, the research aims. And this is like the beginning of those experiments, those technological experiments in bringing self-awareness and self-regulation to the users. This was a project where it would automatically say, hey, you know, if you can choose a particular person, like your mother, and it says, oh, you haven't spoken to them in 3 months, would you like to do that, right? So promoting social connection. And also what she found was that it wasn't necessarily talking to your mom or Jane, that was the most common thing necessarily, but rather mitigating the stress of like, God, I haven't talked to my mom in 3 months, and like having the technology kind of take care of that for you. So you may be yelling at your mom, I don't know, but the point is that that's what she was working on, that's what she was targeting. This was a task manager where it's a web-based task manager. So he has his to-do list there in the right here. So you can click on this tab, but he also keeps his finished list right here, very easily accessible, which he found was that in and of itself, and having that number increase like that, that was very calming for people because these things weren't just disappearing and there's the next batch of stuff. It's just this never-ending to-do list, but rather, okay, there's a queue and they go here, I'm making progress. But also having the ability for social interaction within the task list, and he's even experimenting around solving those tasks for people. But and then also every time you completed a task, this background would change to this like other really beautiful image. So it's kind of interesting. This was a project where your mom texts, did you arrive? And you're like, I don't feel like texting and telling you just do one button, I'm okay. And it would send the mom your location and it would say, she's okay, and that's it. And it was like, it was done. And so you would, that barrier to relieving the anxiety of the mom was very low, and so that was her approach. So I've shown you a bunch of examples of how it ends up looking for different students. And what we did is we kind of abstracted a simple but useful theoretical model, which is if you're a designer thinking about calming technology, understanding the nature of stress and stressors for your particular users is really crucial. You can see when the students were naming the stressors, they're very precise. And the more precise, the better in a lot of ways. But then having some understanding of what might be a calming mechanism, which might be an explicit attempt to mitigate a stressor, or it may be actually introducing a calmer, like music or breathing or something. You know, it has nothing to do with existing stressors in the system. And of course, there's a real grounding in user-centered design, and it's just really like these three things that are on the table. So this is available online if you're interested, because there's some interesting references and explanations at the bottom that are really like a cheat sheet almost. This is the Yerkes-Dodson curve, which we've been working with a lot. And what it basically says is that, you know, you don't want understimulation, you don't want to be overstimulated, you want to be, you know, kind of this optimal level. And I think that's really true, and that makes a lot of sense. But what, in my opinion, is missing from this is the time dimension. Because what we've seen in this kind of, what is sustainable is not necessarily always being in optimum stimulation. Because there's definitely rhythms to this, a rest that needs to happen and so on. So this is just kind of like thinking that we've been doing around this and we haven't really experimented much with it, but I wanted to explain that. And looking at all the student technologies that were coming out, we basically delineated between there's these calm, dedicated approaches, which were like very explicitly, this is going to calm you, and the other were calm augmented, which were existing technologies like word processors. This is one of the most recently created word processors on the market, and it looks like it's from '85 because it's really trying to remove a lot of distractors. So the goal of the technology is not to be calm, the goal is to write the best you can, and so they're including calming elements in it. Some of these word processors have like music that plays in certain ways. I mean, it's interesting. But just removing distractors is a calming technology, right? Because you're explicitly trying to create that state for people. Another thing we did is we tried to distill some design patterns that we were noticing that students were using and stuff. I won't go into this, but there's a lot of potential here, I think. And we've been publishing a bit, right? So one of the things that we published last year was we looked at Jacob Nielsen's heuristics for usability, which you're probably familiar with. And we started thinking, well, what about designers who want to ensure or evaluate that their designs are not creating unnecessary stress? I mean, and this is like, there's going to be stress. They're using your system. There's going to be stress. But how much awareness do you have about how you might mitigate it as much as possible? So that's an example of something that we've been doing. New York Times came to our lab, which was really fun. This is a photo of our class and two of the students. So in the class, I hold very dear to my heart the idea that the students really have to be experientially kind of well-versed in calm. And so we do calming exercises in the class. And that can be it can be totally like, meditation like you might expect, or just walking, or just standing behind someone, and it's a really fun exercise sometimes, but or breathing, or progressive muscle relaxation, or so many different things, and then designing from that space with that subtle distinction between the state and how a system may influence a user. I like this quote to describe how such technologies may end up being in people's lives. We're going to move away from the era of I have hundreds of apps but never think of using them, towards I have these cool apps and they take care of me. I mean, you can see like when these came out and everybody's like, yeah, get all the apps, and then it's just kind of like, okay, I have 1 billion apps, and it's like, it's getting old in a way, right? But there's still the potential of how those apps interact with us. Again, mostly for myself, but feel free to use this time for yourself. So let me explain stress this is like the best diagram that I've ever seen about stress. So here's how it goes. So you have a certain amount, a certain characteristic of individual differences, right? And the brain perceives stress differently. Different people perceive it differently, and according to different environmental stressors, life events, trauma from the past, and so on. And there's these behavioral responses: smoking, drinking, email checking. These all go in the same category. If you thought that you were above that. And then there's these physiologic responses. And what happens is that based upon your physiologic responses, you end up with a certain amount of allostatic load in the body. So it's kind of like you're boiling some milk. And if you turn the thing really high, and it may just burn over. But if you keep it at a low simmer appropriately, you can heat it well, and so on, right? So it's kind of like the load is kind of like how much this thing is, this milk, this is the metaphor we use in the class, but how much this milk is going to boil over or burn and so on. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that in the physiologic responses, the pupils dilate, your muscles may clench, the blood flow changes in the body, your heart rate changes, and your breathing changes. And of all those indicators, and there are more, the one that you have conscious control of is the breathing, which is why a lot of research goes into breathing. Because you can sense it yourself. You don't know when your pupils are dilating or even when your heart rate increases unless it's really pounding. But you can see your breath quite easily. That's really the only reason. I mean, I shouldn't say the only reason. So in effect, stress affects your breath rate. And it's been shown during exams and homework, computer data entry, and the threat of electric shock. So what's interesting about this is that, the body is reacting similarly in these different situations. I have to take an exam. I might be electrically shocked. The body is very similar. So in effect, what you're doing to your body, if you're not self-regulating, is you're putting your body under stress continuously, like it may be being attacked or injured. Okay. So this is the comic, or this is an art piece that I think reflects why the breath is important to people. Different kinds of researchers and psychiatrists and contemplative practitioners and so on. It's really just being aware of where your energy is and what your state is. So what we started doing now talking about what we did, one of the things we built is we built this very rudimentary respiration sensor that you would wear around your abdomen. And initially it was wired, and then it was wireless, and then it was like streaming to your iPhone in real time. So we were like, wow, let's try to see if we can help people with breath awareness, breath regulation. Those people who wanted to, of course. So we validated our sensor against other sensors on the market that weren't ours. And one of the first things we did is we tried to say, well, what if we could help people breathe differently when they're at the computer? It's this whole screen apnea thing. So that's where we started. And we created this really funny, but, this funny attempt at that. I hope it plays. Okay. So here you are working in Excel, and then this thing that the computer determines, oh, you're stressed. And it would just send this bar up and down. You can continue working. So part of our goal was to make it peripheral. And it was like, this is your resting rate. This is your individual resting rate. That's what it did. It was like, hey, this is just really a reminder and a little bit of a guide. So you can ignore it. You can also entrain to it. It's up to you. That was one of our design goals. I mean, from a HCI perspective, it's like, we didn't want to stop the screen and be like, hey, you're stressed, breathe, or go take a break, or do these kind of things. It was like really important to us to help people maintain their productivity and know and feel that they can maintain productivity while self-regulating. So we did an interesting study showing that here's a user's breath rate while they're at the computer, and here's that user when the thing was showing up, the bar. And you can see their breath rates going down, right? But what happens right after the bar goes away is their breath rate goes like back up. It's like, it's an out of sight, out of mind kind of thing, right? So then we were like, okay, so let's see if we can sustain the change using social feedback. Here are these other people. And so we did this fun study which worked like this. You had two conditions. In one condition, we told the users, hey, these people are, when they're breathing calmly right now, and there's this big game at Stanford, and the more calm you breathe, the more points we get, and there's this whole thing, and like they're in another room, like breathing calmly at this time. And the other condition, it was like, okay, this was from yesterday, but they were breathing calmly at those times, and if you breathe calmly, you'll show up on other people's bars, like that, right? And what we found is just the belief of that this was happening in real time changed the breathing pattern. So here's someone's breathing rate. Here is it during the synchronous condition, and here is it during the asynchronous condition. So what we were interested in is seeing, first of all, we saw a difference, but also what was the difference? Was it a magnify effect or a persist effect? Meaning, was it like a persistent change, like their breath rate would come down more in the synchronous condition, or it would just come down more drastically? And we found that it was the latter. It was like these really precipitous falls in breath rate. So it was like, it was like kind of social pressure, which may in fact be stressful, but that's what we noticed. So we took those and we started to kind of experiment with a little bit of a more peripheral approach that wasn't cueing the user like that. So we started to integrate the biofeedback into the operating system with points and so on. We showed the user here's what the screen looked like when you were breathing most quickly and most slowly. So you can kind of say, those are the activities that were causing me the most stress, perhaps. When you hit milestones in your breathing rates over the course of a day, we would show these calming images like, hey, you reached 100 points. And we created this thing called points, just to experiment with this idea, because it was just really, there was no work on it. And then we would show these operant conditioning things like, hey, you just had, like, in case you didn't know, you were just breathing really calmly for the past 6 minutes. So whatever you were doing, maybe take note of that. Or the opposite, hey, you seem to be stressing right now. And often when people see this, they're like, that would stress me out. And maybe it would. But you have to remember that our participants were people that were already saying, we want to have feedback around this topic, because they were interested in breath regulation. We also experimented with social feedback and so on. So the crux of this idea lies in that thing we call the breath tray, which was basically this piece of peripheral feedback about your state at the moment. And this was the poster that we published about it, influencing self-regulation without cognitive deficit. And the idea was we wanted to see if people could self-regulate effectively without interrupting their task too much, because people were coming to us saying, well, I don't want this feedback because I need to get my work done. I can't just be thinking about my breath all the time. So we had these different tasks, very cognitively intense tasks. One was a single task, one was a multitask, and to look at the differences. And what we found was that, just very quickly, basically during multitasking, you're not able to self-regulate, use the feedback to come back to your resting breath rate. During the serial 7s task, which was a mono task, it was like I'm working on this, like programming or something, there was enough attentional resources to devote to that self-regulative process, which was, maybe another reason why multitasking can be stressful, because you really can't devote the attention to where you're at. So we took those takeaways, and again, we had this very rudimentary sensor, and we started streaming that data to the iPhone, and basically did what we did on the desktop, except getting it on the phone. And one of the first things we found was that as soon as it's on the phone, it was a very different way of giving feedback to people, because it's very intimate. It's like part of your body in a way. And so you had feedback about your state in something this close to you. It wasn't on the screen any longer. This screen, it was on this screen. One of the things that we had to do was think about how we give feedback to people. And one of them was having real-time feedback about your state was less valuable than feedback about the recent past. So we introduced this kind of, in the past 10 minutes, you're in the green. Or you know what, you're in the yellow. Or possibly in the red. And that was more useful to this is what number you are right now, stuff like that. So this is just the very beginning of this kind of work. So you see some of the similar push reminders that I showed you on the desktop. Also breathing exercises and points, but also being able to see your history. And then what we wanted to do is sorry, I'm going to quickly, so basically be able to help people determine what activities and what environments were most stressful to them. So we would ask them at appropriate times, capture the activity that you're engaged in, or you're about to start driving or flying or taking a test or at the computer, and then it would later reflect that information to you. So this is one of our participants who self-labeled her data and showed that just for her own edification, that her breath rate while she was meditating was very different from when she was reading or just surfing the web, an activity that she thought was very, just sitting there surfing the web, but her breath rate showed differently. So we gave this system to 5 different users over the course of several days. We found different things. One was that one user had way more calm points per hour than other users. And they had a very different distribution. They had a bimodal distribution of their breathing rates over the course of a week. And we went back and we found out that this user was, in fact, a meditator. So they were somebody that was maintaining awareness of their breathing. And that we didn't know that ahead of time. And it was kind of like, wow, that's fascinating that you're able to really see this. And by the way, there isn't an ambulatory respiration sensor available. So this is the first bell curve of individual respiration rates, ambulatory, meaning as wearable, that we've seen, and I've tried to find and can't really. So it's just the beginning of what's possible with looking at respiratory patterns and shifting those to be,
How do you control for different professions? Don't you think a taxi driver would have a much more stressful lifestyle than, say, a librarian who's just sorting books?
Yeah, they might, but it's really centered around their own resting rate. So these were participants that were interested in developing their breath awareness and regulation. They were already interested in reducing their stress. It wasn't a comparison between individuals so much like
Stressful.
Hey, Nima,
Yeah.
are you able to capture or even estimate the depth of breathing in addition
Yeah.
to rate?
Yeah, we are, but we didn't for this, but we are. Yeah, I mean, okay, so we didn't attempt to answer your question. We didn't attempt to control for it, but in practice, these were all information workers, but it wasn't the goal of doing that. Yeah.
So, looking at those deltas from resting, are they pretty much the same sort of deltas across people?
No, they're very different. I mean, so you can see the distribution of people's breathing rates is quite different, right? You have a classic bell curve. You have this person over here that doesn't vary much, and then you have this guy who, had a whole different thing going on. Had this whole other mode of respiration, really. This is a visualization of how push notifications from the system were influencing the breathing patterns of the users. And you can see the red are like, hey, you're stressed, and seeing what happens after that. So we didn't, anyway, that's what that is. I don't have much time. I'm going to quickly go through this, but I wanted to show you, this is one of the horrible things about the sensor is you have to wear it like a belt. It's like this. It's comfortable, but it's annoying. So we've been working on this new sensor, which uses something called the Hall effect, which is basically a measure of the magnetic field. And so I have it with me. You guys come up and try it afterwards. But it's basically, you kind of put it on your pants or your bra or something. And as you're breathing and as your abdomen changes, it's putting a little bit of pressure on this. And we're able to pick up the breathing patterns really well, and including other things like sighing and laughing and speech. We think that we can do like crying and other things. So this is because we want to do a wider scale study, and we knew giving this to people was going to be too annoying, and it had too many problems with it. So that's where we're going now. We've been experimenting with that, and being able to see a lot of different, being able to capture a lot of different things. Like here's a cough, here's what it looks like, and so on. So we're just in the midst of being able to accurately interpret the data. So right now we're doing this study with Alyssa Eppel at UCSF, who's at the AIM lab, who's really the telomere lab, where we're doing a study with two different groups of mothers. One group has children who are autistic, and one group has children who are not. So one group is the high stress group, and we're seeing if with the breath regulation and breath awareness, we're able to maintain their telomere length, really. And so it's very exciting. And the other research vein is the integration of this data into our productivity tools. So of course there's like the breath work that's happening, but also how do you change the productivity environment that we're in, the interactions with our email, our texting, our phone, all these kind of things. So that's what we're kind of starting to think about now. And lastly, this is work that I'm doing now with Jacob, a visiting professor from Denmark, is thinking about how our interaction designs not only do influence our habits of mind, but how we can explicitly try to influence the habit of mind in a particular way, right? So do we have a point of view on what are great habits of mind, perhaps? And the mindfulness community, this is what they do. So kind of borrowing from them and the stress research to think about having more clarity around how our technologies are changing our habits of mind, not just our habits of interaction, but actually our habits of mind. So like how many times you're checking the phone and reacting to incoming data and stuff like that. So the last slide is thank you. Thanks for your attention. And I'm always open to research collaborators. There's a lot of people that come from different fields that are interested. I mean, there's like medical students come and we chat, and electrical engineers, they want to chat. So really just, if you're interested in talking, I'm always open. And thanks for your attention. It's in mine.
Yeah, I had a question. So it seems like a lot of activities seem to be stressful, and I can understand why exams are stressful, and I can understand possibly why email is stressful, simply because there's an expectation of success in both of them. But I don't see why data entry or surfing the web can be stressful. So I'm wondering what are the principal components, if you will, of activities that make them stressful. Why is surfing the web stressful, but reading a book not?
Yeah. So I have my theory on that.
Yeah.
And it is that the way that window management is designed, just ground up, and the way screens are designed, and it has no rhythm. There's no element of rhythm to it. It's not designed for humans. It's designed for machines. It's like, you know what I mean? It looks like it's a machine made for machines. And so, I think that there's no kind of in between moments. There's no like micro pauses or downtimes, and things kind of just appear. I mean, so Apple has the little thing where the windows come from a place and so on, and in an attempt to make it a little more naturalistic, I think. And that I honestly think that those things help, but I think there's work to be done to like really like starting from scratch, based on like what are the best ways to interact with a human that's working, in an effort to maintain that efficiency of interaction, because that's what's really great. It's very efficient, but without kind of requiring that. Because if you watch somebody at a computer, it's like their eyes actually are opened wide, which is the really great indicator they're stressed or they're under some amount of mild stress, right? I mean, it's not like they're freaking out, but it's there. So you can also watch yourself too. It's like, well, what was happening there? But watching other people is far more illustrative.
I guess just a side comment would be, I'd be curious to see how Kindle compares with, say, a Facebook book, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, just the whole monotasking of it.
Yeah.
I think that in itself is a big differentiator. Yeah, Michael.
So I'm curious about internalizing versus externalizing stress. Spending time here, I really became part of this culture of smiling through your stress. And then spending 6 years on the East Coast, I was seen as really weird because given the exact same stimulus, what would happen was that smiling was wrong. You needed to actually externalize it and say, I'm so stressed out, I have so many things due soon. And I think part of it was a bit of a culture of commiserating together. And this was how they actually got through it. And I'm wondering if there might be a bit of an implicit decision in some of these designs that you're exploring about whether you should be helping people actually sort of smile through or externalize to their friends. And I wonder if you thought about that in your designs, or what, if that's even something that should be considered.
I heard you. I don't know what was just annoying me. It doesn't matter. So it's a really subtle and interesting point. I don't.
Get a Mac.
It is a Mac. Okay, good idea. So I don't think that the designs that we've been doing have been the smile through it thing by any stretch. I mean, I think that.
But they're also not encouraging people to share their stress, right?
Well, maybe not the ones I showed you. I mean, it really depends on how people are approaching, how the designer's approaching it. So we've seen all types. But I think that what we did is we went and looked at the psychology of stress, like what is considered stressful, and it's really unpredictability. When you can't predict something, or you feel a lack of control, or a social evaluative threat to your person or your property. These are like things that are actually like, you can pretty much say there's probability that it's high they're going to feel some stress, and we try to mitigate those things and the emergence of those feelings in the interface. That's been our approach. There's been some work where it's like there's one app called like Make Me Smile, where the student said, you know what, pictures of puppies make me smile. I'm going to make an app that has pictures of puppies, and it's just designed in a really engaging way, but in the end, it's puppies. And I think that, I I think that you could look at that and say that's a smile through it, force not actually kind of releasing it or not dealing with it, but it also could be looked at, depending on the user, as like a reminder, right? To
like your design hypothesis seem to be around cutting it off at the source rather than remediation after you're already stressed.
Yeah. But most recently, I totally acknowledge that the appropriate release is really important. And in fact, I heard a theory of what stress is, that stress is when the release doesn't happen. It's not what caused it. It's actually just the inappropriate release or adaptation to the stressor, which is fascinating to me because then it means like if you're feeling stressed, like release it and you won't be stressed anymore, which is like, maybe it's true sometimes, maybe not other times. And I think there's something there. So especially in the West Coast where we have the Stanford, the whole thing, it's not necessarily true that if you're smiling through it, you're not stressed. So it's a really interesting discussion. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you're able to start to classify different types of breathing, like laughter and possibly crying and stuff. Have you begun to explore how to incorporate that into feedback structure as well?
We haven't, because it's just been very recent that the sensor has been able to do that. But we had we had cool ideas, but it's just really the beginning of that. Because the way I see like the sensors that we have now, that are kind of out there and people are using, like the Fitbits of the world, like they're accelerometers. That's what they are. I mean, and there's other things they do loosely. Even bases just kind of like, they do heart rate, like only when you're not moving and stuff. But what I think we're interested in is like meaningful, easy to interpret, like human meaningful data. Like accelerometer is like machine interesting, and perhaps you could interpret that in a way that's like kind of interesting, but it's very indirect to your actual life and how you experience your life. And so, breathing, laughing, talking, sighing. I mean, like they're like, I don't know. It's very like, we'll see what happens a little bit. We're going to see how we can, because the population is so used to heart rate, as being really important, and it is. But how meaningful is it to us, like without being interpreted by the machine? So we're just starting that. So long answer to an interesting question. So it's 2:00. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.